The email arrived exactly at 9 a.m., demanding that every single employee attend an all-hands meeting immediately in the main auditorium. The atmosphere in the huge room was strange, not excited, but heavy and completely quiet. We all knew something big and bad was coming. On the massive screen, instead of the smiling face of our CEO, Alistair Croft, we saw a pre-recorded professional video. His voice was cold, calm, and completely devoid of any real human warmth. He started by talking about maximizing shareholder value and difficult but necessary restructuring. Then he delivered the cold, terrible news. Effective immediately, he announced, staring straight into the camera with empty eyes. We are implementing a 30% mass layoff across all non-essential departments. The number was huge, terrible, and completely shocking. Before the video was even finished, we saw the awful sight. The side doors of the auditorium swung silently open, and a line of stern-faced security guards walked in. Their job was not to keep us safe, but to immediately escort terminated employees out of the building. My hands felt immediately cold and sweaty. The air in the room was suddenly thick with fear, and the terrible sound of quiet gasps. My heart hammered hard and fast against my ribs as I rushed back to my desk, desperately hoping to see the small green light on my monitor. But it was too late. I reached my computer and quickly tried to log in, but the screen only showed a cold, hard access denied message. My keycard was already completely deactivated right there at my desk, right in front of everyone. The humiliation was instant, public, and absolutely brutal. I looked around the large, suddenly quiet office. Near me, Jonathan, a loyal, long-term colleague who had worked here for over 20 years, was sitting at his desk. He completely crumbled into huge, wet tears as a silent security guard approached him with a big, empty box. We had all dedicated our lives to Apex Dynamics, and this was our cold, terrible reward. As I slowly started packing my personal belongings into a small, sterile cardboard box, my anger began to boil and bubble up, completely replacing the initial shock and terrible fear. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a cruel, public act of personal betrayal. They didn't even have the courage to tell us the truth to our faces. They had sent a cold, heartless video and then used security guards as silent, cold executioners. I vowed right then and there to make them pay for the huge mistake they had made. I carefully placed a small, framed picture of my family into the cardboard box. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a growing, quiet, powerful rage. The security guard stood silently by my side, urging me with his eyes to hurry up and leave. But as I looked at the files on my desk, the ones I wouldn't finish, a small, tiny glimmer of an idea suddenly ignited in my furious mind. I had worked in the legal compliance department for years. My job was often boring and detailed, involving endless hours of reading and reviewing complex, old documents. I suddenly remembered spending an entire, long weekend reviewing the company's ancient, original corporate bylaws. There was an obscure clause buried deep inside that massive document, a completely forgotten rule about shareholder rights. It was a rule designed for huge corporate battles, not for a single small employee. The idea was simple, bold, and completely risky. It was a tiny, small spark, but I knew immediately that it was the only way to fight back against their huge corporate power. I smiled to myself, a cold, powerful smile. My revenge would not be simple or loud. It would be completely legal and absolutely devastating. As I was being escorted out of the building, I walked straight to a small coffee shop across the street. I completely ignored the angry look of the silent security guard, who finally gave up and went back to his terrible job. I sat down at a small wobbly table, pulled out my phone, and immediately opened my investment application. I took the severance pay I had just received, a payment meant to silence me, and used a small part of it. I found Apex Dynamics on the stock exchange, and immediately entered the purchase order. I didn't buy 100 shares or 1,000. I bought only one single share of their stock. It cost me only a small amount of money, but its actual, true value was completely priceless. The confirmation email popped up on my phone screen. Transaction complete. 1 share of Apex Dynamics acquired. This small, simple email was now my completely legal weapon. They had fired me as an employee, But they had unknowingly just made me a shareholder with the exact same rights as the largest investment fund. I was no longer just Elise the dismissed worker. I was now Elise the owner, and I had a completely legal right to make them listen to me. I immediately printed the stock certificate and the confirmation email at the coffee shop. I was acting fast, moving with the cold, powerful precision of a highly trained lawyer. The small piece of paper in my hand was the key to unlocking the company's biggest legal nightmare. I drove straight to the best law office in the city and had a lawyer draft a huge, formal notice. A document that would completely rock the entire corporate world of Apex Dynamics. I was exercising my absolute, legal right as a shareholder to formally demand an extraordinary general meeting, EGM. The official purpose of the completely unexpected meeting was clear, simple, and absolutely devastating. To hold a huge shareholder vote on the dismissal of the entire board of directors, including the arrogant CEO, Alistair Croft. The notice was perfectly served on the company's legal department by the end of the day. They had tried to dismiss me with a cold video, but I was demanding that the entire, arrogant board face a very public, completely humiliating vote of no confidence. The formal legal notice of the Extraordinary General Meeting, EGM, landed on the board's huge mahogany table the very next morning. They held an emergency private meeting immediately. The room was full of complete silence, which quickly turned into loud, booming laughter. Alistair Croft picked up the huge, official document with 2 fingers, looking at it with sheer disgust. "A formal challenge?" he asked, completely unable to contain his loud, arrogant laugh. "From whom?" "One of the fired employees." His private secretary immediately confirmed the completely ridiculous truth. The demand was indeed from Elise Hartley, a fired employee who owned only one single share of their massive stock. The board laughed loudly at my cute legal maneuver, calling it a pathetic nuisance and a silly publicity stunt from a disgruntled, petty former worker. They completely dismissed the entire legal challenge. They were completely blinded by their huge, arrogant power and their deep, utter disrespect for the little people. They were completely convinced they could simply ignore me, or crush me, with a single, quick corporate response. The board completely underestimated my fury and my deep, detailed knowledge of the company's inner workings. I spent the next few days working constantly, without rest, on the second, most important part of my plan. I wasn't just going to demand a simple vote. I was going to completely justify it with hard, cold facts. I compiled a devastating public dossier using only information that was already legally available. Their official quarterly reports, their competitor analyses, and their internal financial projections that I knew well. The dossier completely proved that the massive 30% layoffs were not a necessary move to save the company, as they had publicly claimed. Instead, the hard, cold numbers showed that the layoffs were actually a short-sighted cash grab. A quick move designed to instantly inflate their stock price and trigger massive, personal bonuses for the entire greedy board. I released the simple, powerful, and completely damning dossier to every financial news outlet, framing the entire quiet corporate challenge as a huge moral crusade for all shareholders. The board's previous arrogant laughter immediately turned into cold, sheer panic. My devastating dossier and my legal notice demanding the Extraordinary General Meeting EGM had caused a huge, massive stir among the smaller shareholders. The board knew they had to quickly eliminate the threat, and they chose a massive nuclear corporate weapon, the poison pill defense. In a quick, quiet, overnight maneuver, the board secretly activated the defense. They officially announced that they were immediately issuing millions of new shares directly to themselves and to a few completely loyal, safe investors. This complex legal move instantly diluted the stock of every other shareholder in the company. The plan was simple, cruel, and completely legal. By instantly flooding the market with new shares owned by the board, my single share, and the votes of all the small, angry shareholders, would become completely powerless. It was a crushing, completely devastating move designed to end the entire corporate fight immediately. I sat in my small new home office, staring at the legal notice about the share dilution. My heart sank heavily into my stomach. My single powerful share was now a tiny fraction of the massive company. All my hard work, my clever legal maneuvering, and my huge quiet revenge seemed to have been completely defeated by one single cold, crushing corporate move. The powerful board had completely won, using their massive corporate power and their huge money to instantly stomp out the tiny spark of rebellion. It felt like the end of the entire road. The entire thing had been a beautiful, exciting fight, but I had lost against the cold, hard reality of corporate power. But as I was about to completely give up, my sharp legal mind kicked in. Why had they used such a massive, drastic measure to completely fight a single dismissed employee who owned only one share? It was like using a powerful nuclear missile to completely destroy a tiny, harmless fly. Their reaction was completely over the top and completely illogical. It was a sure sign of deep, absolute desperation, not simple, confident power. I knew then that there had to be something much bigger, much darker, and much more important that they were desperately trying to hide. Refusing to completely accept the apparent defeat, I immediately began digging much deeper. If the board was so completely desperate to silence me, it meant the layoffs and the poison pill were only desperate diversions to cover up a much bigger, more terrible secret. I used my old secure access codes, the ones I knew were slow to completely deactivate, to carefully log into the backup archives of the legal compliance servers. I spent hours sifting through massive, disorganized files, ignoring the huge financial reports. I was looking for something that was completely hidden, completely non-public, and completely non-financial. Deep inside an old server log, I found completely cryptic references to a long, massive project named Project Chimera. The file size was huge and the dates were completely recent. There were also massive, completely off-book capital allocations, huge amounts of money spent without any clear public documentation. This was the dark, huge secret. Project Chimera was the true, dangerous liability they were desperately trying to hide by quickly raising cash through the brutal layoffs. I knew I was completely close to the terrible truth, but I desperately needed hard, solid evidence to completely prove the massive, dangerous nature of Project Chimera. Then, completely unexpectedly, the universe delivered the key. I received a small silent message on an old secure chat app one hadn't used in years. The message was from Arthur Vance, a quiet, extremely detailed accountant from the finance department who had also been immediately fired in the mass layoffs. Arthur was completely guilt-ridden and terrified. "They're not just greedy, Elise," he whispered over the phone, his voice shaking with fear. "They're completely desperate. They're sitting on a time bomb." He secretly met me in a completely dark, deserted parking garage and quickly handed me a small, encrypted external hard drive. "This has the complete truth about Chimera," he said, looking nervously around. "It shows all the hidden accounting. Use it to completely destroy them." I thanked him profusely, clutching the drive tightly in my hand. It was the crucial evidence I needed to completely destroy the board. I immediately rushed home and quickly loaded the encrypted drive into my secure computer. The information inside was simple, organized, and completely devastating. Project Chimera was not just a product failure. It was an absolute, catastrophic nightmare. It was a massive, new industrial plant designed to produce a powerful, cheap new battery component. The plant had failed massively during its initial test phase, causing a completely silent, terrible environmental disaster in a remote location. The huge, terrible failure had created a hidden liability worth billions of dollars. Costs for the massive cleanup, the inevitable lawsuits, and the huge regulatory fines. The board, led by Alistair Croft, had completely concealed the entire disaster from the government, the press, and the entire shareholder base. They were hoping the money from the brutal layoffs, combined with the stock price manipulation, would give them enough time to completely fix the problem in secret. They weren't just greedy, they were criminal and highly irresponsible. With the devastating, hard evidence of Project Chimera, now safely in my possession, I knew that going to the simple press was not enough. I needed to use this powerful information to completely trigger a massive, corporate earthquake. A crisis so huge that the board could not survive it. I immediately created 2 perfect, anonymous packages of evidence. Each package contained the complete, clear proof of the secret environmental disaster and the company's massive, hidden billion-dollar liability. I sent the first package, completely untraceable, directly to Titan Global, Apex Dynamics' biggest and most aggressive competitor in the entire industry. I sent the second package to Vulture Capital, a brilliant, ruthless, and highly notorious corporate raider hedge fund known for completely dismantling weak companies. I didn't want simple justice, I wanted war. I was giving the two biggest, most powerful sharks in the entire corporate ocean a clear, simple, and bloody roadmap to completely destroy Apex Dynamics and its corrupt, arrogant board. The huge, immediate impact was completely massive and instant. Titan Global, Apex's biggest competitor, immediately saw the complete, fatal weakness in their rival. The board was completely distracted, desperately trying to put out the small, unimportant fires I had started with the EGM demand. Titan Global seized the perfect, crucial moment. They publicly announced a complete, surprise hostile takeover bid for the entire Apex Dynamics company. The bid was timed perfectly, right as the entire stock market was still processing the news of the board's massive poison pill defense. The entire stock market completely went into immediate chaos. Shareholders, already completely furious over the brutal layoffs and the extreme share dilution, were now thrown into complete, deep panic by the takeover announcement. Apex Dynamics, once a powerful, secure corporate entity, was now officially and publicly a weak, vulnerable target. The board was immediately pulled away from worrying about my single share and thrown into a complete, brutal fight for the very survival of the entire company. The second, powerful package of evidence had immediately landed on the massive desk of Meredith Thorne, the completely brilliant, sharp, and absolutely ruthless founder of Vulture Capital. She was instantly intrigued. She saw my entire strategy, the single share, the EGM demand, and the perfect timing of the massive leak. She immediately recognized the work of a powerful, logical, and deeply dedicated strategist. Meredith Thorne, seeing the huge, massive chaos caused by the hostile takeover bid, saw a complete, perfect opportunity. The board's clumsy, desperate poison pill had completely flooded the market with millions of cheap, diluted shares. She immediately began aggressively buying those cheap, easy shares. She was gathering up all the discarded votes that the board thought they had completely neutralized. The board had made the entire stock affordable and available in their panicked attempt to crush me. Now the powerful, relentless corporate shark was quickly buying up their mistakes. Meredith Thorne wasn't just buying shares. She was quickly buying enough voting power to completely decide the entire outcome of my planned EGM. I was completely shocked when my phone rang, and the caller ID showed the name Meredith Thorne. The ruthless corporate raider, the most feared woman on Wall Street, was completely calling me, the single share shareholder. Her voice was cold, sharp, and completely direct. "I love your work, Elise," she stated clearly. "You caused this absolute chaos with a single share and a deep understanding of corporate law. Now let's completely finish it." She quickly proposed a powerful, completely unlikely alliance. Vulture Capital would immediately provide the crucial voting power, millions of votes collected from the diluted shares. In return, I had to provide the public necessary moral justification for the takeover, the legal roadmap for the EGM, and the complete proof of the Project Chimera scandal. It was a perfect, powerful marriage of my detailed moral clarity and her massive, brutal corporate power. We quickly and silently shook hands on the complete, powerful deal. The completely unique story immediately exploded across the entire globe. The headlines were everywhere. The single-share shareholder versus the corporate giant. My face was suddenly everywhere, on every business channel, every newspaper, and every online forum. I was no longer just Elise the fired employee. I was the completely powerful public face of a global shareholder revolution. The story resonated deeply with millions of people who felt completely ignored and mistreated by big, powerful corporations. Small individual shareholders, fired employees, and concerned citizens all rallied completely around my powerful crusade. They started actively buying up small blocks of Apex Dynamics stock, not for profit, but to increase the total number of small, angry votes against the arrogant board. The media storm completely shifted the entire narrative. The hostile takeover was no longer seen as a simple corporate raid. It was a huge, dramatic fight for corporate ethics and accountability. I was leveraging my personal betrayal into a huge, powerful global movement. The board of directors was now completely consumed by sheer, uncontrollable panic. Their entire perfectly planned structure of control was completely crumbling around them in real time. Their massive strategic asset sale completely collapsed because of the hostile takeover bid. Their stock was completely volatile and totally unpredictable. They were facing three massive simultaneous disasters: a hostile takeover by Titan Global, a massive open rebellion by Vulture Capital, and all the small shareholders, and the complete terrifying exposure of the hidden Project Chimera scandal. Alistair Croft was completely unable to control the situation. He looked old, tired, and deeply fearful. They desperately tried to find a legal loophole to completely stop the Extraordinary General Meeting (EGM), but my original legal filing was absolutely perfect. They had legally diluted the shares, but they had not completely eliminated the legal right to hold the vote. The EGM was quickly approaching, and they were completely cornered. In a final desperate act of corporate self-defense, the board quickly launched a massive counterattack. They started a brutal, nasty smear campaign against me. They immediately leaked completely false stories to friendly news outlets, claiming I was an incompetent, disgruntled employee who was only seeking petty, personal revenge because of a deep failure in my job. They claimed I was being paid secretly by Vulture Capital to completely destroy the company. They painted me as a complete, cold traitor, completely ignoring the massive, terrible environmental disaster they were still desperately hiding. They tried to immediately shift the entire blame, hoping the public would completely turn against me. But the desperate smear campaign completely backfired. The public saw their attack as simple proof of their own huge, arrogant desperation and their deeply toxic culture. The more they attacked me, the stronger the public support for my powerful moral crusade became. Their huge power was completely fading away with every single desperate lie they told. I decided I could not let the board's terrible lies stand. I immediately booked an interview on a major financial news network. I was completely calm, incredibly professional, and extremely well prepared. I knew I had to completely dismantle their lies with cold, hard facts. The interviewer asked me directly about the board's smear campaign. I looked straight into the camera and completely dismantled their accusations with calm, clear precision. They call me a disgruntled employee, I stated simply, but my competence is proven by the legal precision of my entire EGM filing, which they cannot legally stop. Then I delivered the final, most crucial blow. I completely laid out the entire hidden Project Chimera scandal for the entire world to see. I showed the complete proof of the environmental disaster and the board's massive, secret cover-up. The entire, brutal interview was completely devastating. I had completely stripped the board of all their remaining credibility, all their power, and all their desperate lies. The long-awaited day of the Extraordinary General Meeting, EGM, finally arrived. The huge, elegant ballroom where the meeting was held was completely packed. It was no longer just a boring, quiet corporate formality. It was a massive, media circus showdown that the whole world was watching intently. Small shareholders, big fund managers, and tons of curious reporters filled every single seat. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, completely thick with anticipation and sheer corporate drama. Security was everywhere. Alistair Croft and the remaining members of the board sat at the massive front table, looking completely stiff and deeply miserable. The entire meeting was being completely broadcast live on every major news network. The massive, historic vote to completely dismiss the entire board of directors was only a few short hours away. I sat quietly in the front row with Meredith Thorne and her large team, completely ready to deliver the final, crucial blow. The official business of the Extraordinary General Meeting, EGM, began with a massive cold silence. Alistair Croft was the first to speak, giving a completely desperate, unscripted speech. His usual arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. He completely begged the shareholders for their trust and stability. He completely promised a massive, immediate internal review of all corporate spending. We made small mistakes, he pleaded, his voice cracking with fear. But changing the entire leadership now will destroy the company completely. We need stability to fight the hostile takeover. His plea was completely hollow and desperate. Everyone in the room knew he was only fighting for his own huge paycheck and his massive reputation. His massive, desperate words completely failed to move the already enraged, massive shareholder base. The room remained cold, quiet, and completely unconvinced. It was finally my turn. I slowly walked to the large, powerful podium, carrying nothing but a small, single sheet of paper. I took a deep, steady breath and looked straight at the entire, miserable board. I didn't just quietly read my legal proposal. I delivered the entire, powerful, damning closing argument. I did not yell or shout. I spoke with calm, quiet, complete precision. I completely laid bare the board's lies, their pure greed, and the massive, horrifying scale of the hidden Project Chimera liability. You were asked to save the company, I stated clearly, pointing at them. Instead, you tried to fire 4,000 employees and completely cover up a billion-dollar environmental disaster. This vote is not just about our money. It's about our massive corporate conscience. My powerful, simple words completely resonated with every single person in the room. The long, dramatic debate finally ended. The chair called for the final, official vote on the crucial motion to completely dismiss the entire board. The votes were quickly collected from the small shareholders present and immediately tallied with the massive proxy votes submitted by the major funds. The entire room went completely quiet. The total votes were instantly displayed on a massive, huge screen behind the silent stage. It was a complete, tense, dramatic silence as the final numbers were being quickly calculated. Every single eye in the entire room was completely glued to the huge screen, waiting for the final, crucial result that would completely change the future of the entire Apex Dynamics company. I held my breath, standing perfectly still. My revenge, my single share, my desperate legal battle, and my unlikely alliance, all came down to this final, terrifying single moment. I looked at Meredith Thorne, and she gave me a small, confident nod. She knew exactly what was about to happen. The final result flashed immediately onto the massive screen. The number was massive, completely undeniable, and absolutely perfect. Motion to dismiss the board. Passed with 72% of the total vote. It was a complete, massive landslide. The motion had completely passed because of the powerful, combined force of Vulture Capital's strategically bought shares, the massive proxy votes from Titan Global, and the huge, unified wave of outrage from the small, individual shareholders. My single, tiny share had completely triggered a massive, beautiful corporate avalanche that swept away the entire, arrogant old guard. A huge, massive wave of pure, powerful relief and incredible triumph washed over me. The arrogance of the old, greedy board was completely and utterly gone forever. The corrupt regime had completely fallen. I had completely won the biggest corporate fight of my entire life. The immediate aftermath was complete, utter, humiliating chaos for the entire board. The chair of the meeting immediately declared the motion passed, and the board legally dismissed. The security guards, the very same ones who had silently escorted me out of the building months ago, now moved quickly, professionally, and decisively. They immediately approached Alistair Croft and the other completely stunned, defeated board members. They were quietly and quickly escorted out of the ballroom and the building, their faces a pale, horrible mask of disbelief and complete, total humiliation. The scene was one of utter, final, brutal defeat. They had gambled everything on their own arrogance, and they had completely lost to a former employee and her single, tiny share. The room immediately erupted into huge, thunderous applause. I had not just gotten my personal job back. I had completely dismantled a huge, corrupt, arrogant system. A new, completely temporary board was immediately installed by the powerful, winning coalition of Vulture Capital and Titan Global. Their first action was swift, powerful, and completely just. They immediately announced a complete halt to all remaining layoffs and a massive, public internal investigation into the massive accounting irregularities and the hidden Project Chimera scandal. The truth was finally, powerfully coming out. The company's massive, toxic culture was now completely exposed and being completely dismantled. The small, tiny share I had bought had become the single, powerful spark that completely ignited the massive, necessary change the entire company deeply needed. The entire corporate world watched in complete, total shock. The little guy had completely won against the huge, corrupt corporate machine. It was a powerful, massive, historic victory for accountability and complete transparency. A few short weeks later, I was completely summoned to a quiet, private meeting with Meredith Thorne and the new, powerful chairman. I expected a huge thank you, maybe a promotion, or simply an offer to fully restore my old, comfortable job. But the offer they gave me was completely different, unexpected, and absolutely incredible. They didn't just offer me my old job back. They immediately offered me a completely newly created, permanent seat on the board of directors itself. My new powerful title, Chief Ethics Officer. You understand this entire company's massive failings, Elise, Meredith Thorne stated clearly, looking at me with deep respect. You understand the laws, and you have the moral strength to completely rebuild this entire company from the inside out. We need your fire and your powerful, ethical compass. I immediately accepted the offer. I was finally back in the boardroom, but this time, I was completely in charge. From my new, powerful seat inside the boardroom, I immediately helped dismantle the old, toxic corporate culture. My first, immediate act was to institute new whistleblower protections and completely transparent financial reporting policies. I made sure that employees were completely valued, not just seen as simple, disposable line items on a balance sheet. The entire, old arrogant board's cold, terrible ghost was completely gone. I was replacing their entire culture of greed and secrecy with one of complete, total transparency and deep, ethical responsibility. The powerful fire of my betrayal was now being completely used to clean and rebuild the entire structure of the company. I wasn't just working. I was completely reforming the entire company. I was completely satisfied. My fight had been completely and totally necessary to force the huge, powerful change that had to happen. I had used the entire system's cold, hard, legal rules to completely expose and then completely destroy its own moral failure. 1 year later, Apex Dynamics was a completely different company. It was financially profitable again, and completely ethically reformed. The company was no longer a completely soft, vulnerable target for hostile takeovers or greedy internal plots. I stood in my new, spacious, large corner office, looking out over the sprawling city. I didn't feel any simple, easy vengeance, only the quiet, powerful satisfaction of having built something completely better from the dusty, miserable ashes of the old, corrupt regime. My single tiny share of stock, the one that had started the entire massive corporate nightmare, was now completely framed and securely mounted on the wall behind my huge desk. It was a permanent, powerful reminder of the deep, immense power of one single person and her powerful, ethical resolve. The single share was the ultimate, massive, permanent symbol of the little guy's powerful, complete, and final victory over massive corporate greed.